Hey there, Miriam. Thanks for coming in. Good to see you again. That session last week was, I felt really productive. So first wondering how your week was since.
Yeah, it's been okay. It was good being able to talk about some of the things that are going on for me. But also, I guess, opening up some of that stuff made some things harder. I found it actually quite overwhelming talking about my relationship to my uncle, and I just feel like I've been sort of noticing my thoughts and feelings about it a lot more. So yeah.
So vocalizing, are you saying that vocalizing it to me in the last session drew up a lot more content?
Yeah, and it reminded me of a lot of other memories and feelings that I have about those things, so that was quite challenging. Yeah, and I just remembered like times when I was a kid and he was really unwell, and it just, a lot of that grief came back for me. And also thinking about my mum and how she might have felt about that, and my grandma as well. So yeah, that's been hard this week.
And what kind of feelings, apart from grief or within the grief, have you been feeling with regard to your uncle?
Look, I don't know. I feel angry at him for, I guess, you know, when someone comes into your life that you really care about and then it seems like they're not going to be around, that's very frustrating. And so, yeah, I feel ripped off in a way.
Yeah. And
because my dad wasn't really around much, he was like a bit of a father figure for me. And so, yeah, it's hit me really hard. But I'm pissed off as well as upset. Yeah.
You're feeling abandoned a little bit by some of the male figures in your life, in your early life?
I don't know if I would say abandoned, but I do feel like that presence is lacking. Yeah.
So not full abandonment per se, but maybe a little bit of neglect or something like that in terms of their presence and involvement in your life.
I guess you could say that, yeah.
Yeah. When you say I guess you could say that. Was I accurate in that, or was it just is there a more accurate framing that you could describe for me as to how you're feeling about that? I'm just trying to sort of reach and understand.
Yeah. I feel like I have missed out on something, but I don't necessarily think that it's those people's fault. If that makes sense. Like, it's not about they didn't do enough or they could have done better. I know that they did the best they could, and I don't blame them for that, but I feel, you know, quite sad that I don't have that figure to look up to and to get advice from. And yeah, like I said to you last week, like my dad was away a lot and he didn't really get involved in the parenting on the same level as my mum, and her brother was around a lot more, but he was really unwell, and so when he passed away, that was a big hole in my life. But I think my dad feels like he feels a bit of shame that he couldn't fill that place for me, and I think there's a bit of regret in him, but he also is unwilling to bridge that gap with me and my siblings. So it's a bit tricky because we're feeling that loss and that sadness from both relationships being broken down in different ways. But yet the people that are still around are also struggling with their own grief, and they're struggling to reach out as well.
And you mentioned earlier you're also feeling angry. Is that anger, do you think, your personal response to that grief and sadness of your uncle passing or leaving you, and also your dad being away? Is that how you dealt with it, or is that the feeling that you've attributed to it, a bit of anger?
Yeah, it is, and for a long time I felt like, oh, why did this happen to me, and this is so unfair, and this is fucked up, and like I look around at a lot of my friends and they've lost key relationships in their lives too, and but I guess I feel a bit, I just felt for ages that it just didn't make sense.
Yeah, and it seems to be a past tense thing. You felt for ages that it didn't make sense. How are you feeling now?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it's changing for me. Slowly.
It does sound like that to me.
Yeah, and being able to talk about it with someone who's not in my family is actually really helpful.
Often the case, yeah.
Yeah, but I guess it's shifting a bit more for me as I begin to understand more the people around me as well, and why I feel that anger, and also just life, how that works.
Yeah.
Or doesn't work. But yeah, I think that I'm coming more to a place of peacefulness, but there are still some fractured relationships that I am grieving. Particularly I think with my dad, but also there's been a bit of a gulf emerging between my mum and I, because she is a very private griever. Like, she doesn't like to cry in front of us, and she's always tried to be really strong because of, I guess, being the main parent while we were growing up. She didn't want us to feel like she didn't want to be there, or she was out of control, or that, you know, we were too much for her or anything like that. And I really am grateful for her trying to do that, but I can also see that it's a little bit hard for her. Yeah.
So please correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm hearing that with regard to your mother, she was adopted the position of strength and reliance for you guys when you were young, as these things were occurring. And now that you're older and she's also older, you're noticing that her grief is present but private within her, and you would like to explore that a lot more with her.
Yeah, well, I think it's something we can share.
Yeah.
And that I also worry about whether she's fully expressing it, or whether she's just like pushing it down to keep going, even though she's not really in a position where she has to do that anymore. Yeah.
Have you, out of curiosity, taken up this conversation with her on any level to this point?
No.
Okay. Is she somewhat unapproachable like that?
Yeah, she can be. You really have to pick your moment with Mum, and it's not something we've ever really talked about. Talked about it with my grandma, with her mum, and my uncle, he was really good with her actually. But yeah, he just always knew what to say.
Is that a conversation with her that you personally would like to have, if it could be had?
Yeah, I would like to talk to her about it. I know it would be difficult, but I think it would be good for us to talk about that.
Well, you don't strike me as someone who's unwilling to go into difficult matters for the cause of healing and integration. So.
Yeah, well, all the hard things have already happened.
That's true.
Like, it's not our family's gone through a lot in the last few years, and yeah, I guess I just think that what's the point of it if we don't make something of it?
Process it, yeah. Very good point. Is in terms of your mum, just to stay on that track for a little while, you mentioned that there are moments, you have to pick your moments essentially. In your own understanding, what kinds of moments do you foresee that you might be able to have or strike up that type of conversation with her? Is there anything at all?
I'd really
Time of
have
day
to think
or a
about
mood
it.
that she's in or anything?
She gets very defensive when she's at her own house.
When she's at her own house?
Yeah.
Ah, interesting.
Yeah, it is actually. I think maybe she just goes back into mother mode. But yeah, I'd have to think about it because,
Sorry, do go on.
Oh, just especially at the moment, she's very up and down.
Yeah, a bit volatile at the moment.
Yeah.
Oh, let's leave that aside for now, this thing with your mum. And, maybe in the interim between now and the next session, you can have a deeper think about the types of circumstances in which you might be able to approach her. And then there's the possibility, therefore, in the future of even contriving or creating, really, some of those circumstances, if you're willing to venture into that domain with her. But regarding, you mentioned earlier your brothers as well. You mentioned your brothers and their grief and how they're dealing with it, and that as a group of siblings, you've all experienced these things. Do you guys talk about that together amongst yourselves?
Sometimes. It's been rare for us to all be together without mum though, in the recent years. And they both live in different cities, they've got their own lives. So that's probably another reason that there's a lot of pressure on my relationship with mum at the moment, because I'm the only one still here, and she's a very family oriented person, so she really wants to spend time with the people that are still around. And I know my brothers feel a lot of pressure to visit and spend time, but yeah, because we had Pete's funeral and all the stuff after that, we sort of we haven't really had time just as siblings. So yeah.
And you're the oldest sibling?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And in terms of being the oldest, is there like a role, a leadership role that you can perceive for yourself in creating those discussions amongst yourselves, or is that something that is someone else's better suited to, one of your brothers perhaps?
Well, I am pretty bossy, but I think my youngest brother is sort of the conversation starter in the family. Like he gets away with the most shit, so he can
as the youngest always tend to do.
Yes. Yeah. So he can actually bring up things and he gets a much better response from bringing things up in the family than I would, particularly mum, because she's very soft on him.
Whereas if I'm hearing you correctly from before, your relationship with your mum's a little bit tense or strained at the moment.
Yeah. It is.
Starting those conversations a bit more difficult initially.
That's right. And there's been a few times where I've called up my youngest brother and said like, oh, how do you really know how mum is? Because she tends to be a bit more relaxed with him even though she's protective, because she's got that ease with him, it's a bit easier.